Get inside, hurry!
Hurry up, they're coming!
Get inside, go, run! They're spraying something!
Inside! Hurry!
Get inside! Quick, keep running! Look out! Look out!
The U.S. attacked Iran with hopes of a quick victory, but lessons of the past are easily forgotten. What seemed like an easy victory was simply laying the foundations for the next terrorist attack. When a country is backed into a corner, when defeat feels inevitable and they have nothing left to lose, the unthinkable can suddenly become the only option left. Wars rarely end when we want them to. It's naive to think we can drop a few bombs, remove a foreign leader, and simply go home. Even after the main conflict ends, in our modern technology-driven world, terrorist attacks can persist. And yet, when it comes to dirty bombs, many security experts argue they have little value. They cannot destroy cities the way nuclear weapons can. An explosive dirty bomb can only spread radioactive material a limited distance. In the past, dispersing radioactive material on a large scale required massive explosives and large quantities of material. A dirty bomb was crude and inefficient. Today, modern technology has begun to change that equation.
Keep going, don't stop! Get inside, quickly! Close the door!
With the rise of drones and advanced dispersal systems, contamination may no longer require a massive blast. Radioactive material could be spread as a fine mist, dust, or aerosol, quietly distributed across a wide area. Even something as simple as spraying radioactive material on produce in a store could create terror. The threat is no longer just a dramatic detonation. It is the possibility of deliberate environmental poisoning, an attack designed not to destroy a city, but to make parts of it unlivable. A radiological dispersal device does not need to win a war. It only needs to satisfy a human desire for revenge.
Look, it's a drone.
I see it.
Wow.
Yeah, it's just a drone. What is it doing? I see smoke coming out of it.
Run! Is this normal?
I've never seen a show like this.
Everyone, please calmly exit the stadium.
Get out of the way!
Move! 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 Oh my God, run!
We interrupt our regular programming to bring you a developing, unprecedented emergency. We have preliminary reports from New York, Alabama, and Tel Aviv of a terrorist attack. The Department of Homeland Security reports that this is a multi-target radiological terror attack. Here is what we know right now. In New York City, swarms of small drones were observed flying over Midtown Manhattan. Witnesses state drones were spraying an unknown substance on crowds in Times Square and several streets in the area. Simultaneously, drones attacked 2 college football stadiums and a TSA checkpoint at John F. Kennedy Airport. We now take you to a press conference by the New York City Police Commissioner.
We ask everyone to stay calm and remain in your homes. As of now, no injuries or deaths are reported from the attack.
When the attack began, sensors around Times Square, Fifth Avenue, and 54th Street alerted us to a radiological event. We are still assessing that data, along with our partners from Homeland Security and the Nuclear Regulatory Agency. Anyone who was near these events or came in contact with dust in Midtown needs to report to their nearest police or fire station.
If you want to see how a tiny amount of radioactive salt can paralyze a city simply through human movement, look at Brazil in 1987. Inside an abandoned clinic sat an obsolete medical machine. Hidden inside its heavy, large shielding was just 93 grams of cesium-137. When scrap metal hunters broke the capsule open, they found a salt-like powder emitting a ghostly blue light. Mesmerized, they sold it to a junkyard owner, who took it home and invited the neighborhood to see it. People rubbed the glowing powder on their skin like carnival glitter. A 6-year-old girl named Lyda got the dust on her hands and then onto her sandwich. For over 2 weeks, this radioactive ghost powder was tracked blindly through a city of 1 million people, on the soles of shoes, paper currency, and public buses. Dozens fell violently ill. The horror was only realized when a victim's wife carried the leaking capsule on a public bus to a hospital. 4 people died agonizing deaths, including young Lyda, whose contamination was so severe she required a lead-lined, concrete-encased coffin. The cleanup was an economic nightmare. Authorities had to monitor 112,000 panicked citizens, demolish homes, and rip up neighborhood topsoil. Just 93 grams of cesium-137 generated over 3,000 cubic meters of radioactive waste. Yes, 3,000 cubic meters of radioactive waste. And that was just an accident. Now imagine a state actor intentionally dispersing thousands of times that amount over the financial capital of an enemy nation.
Don't breathe the dust. Take off your jackets. A bus will take you to decontaminate.
Radiation doesn't hit you all at once like a car crash. It's slower. Instead, it bombards the body with high-energy particles. Gamma rays, beta particles, alpha particles, like tiny bullets piercing the body. The longer someone is exposed, the more the damage begins to accumulate. It's almost like a sunburn. Stay in the sun for a few minutes and nothing seems wrong. Stay longer and the burn slowly appears. Radiation works the same way. So in those first hours, people showed little or no signs of radiation illness. There were no immediate deaths, no one collapsing on sidewalks, but the victims wouldn't begin to show signs of illness right away. It would take hours, sometimes days or even weeks, before the first signs of radiation sickness would begin to appear.
I don't know what's going on. The police told us there was a terrorist attack. Just stay away from Midtown.
It's unsafe out here. Go inside now. Everything's contaminated. It's too hot here. We need to leave. Keep the line moving, gentlemen. We need to scrub thoroughly. Okay, next man up. It hurts, but we have to exfoliate the outer layer of skin to remove the contamination. Keep your back to the screen and lift your arms. We need to get you clean. Just hold still. You're doing well. Keep still, sir. We need to make sure you're completely clear. Moving on to the next. Keep the line moving, gentlemen. These are clean clothes to wear until you get home. How do I get my clothes back?
Your clothes are contaminated. They will be buried. I want my clothes. That was a $20,000 Brioni suit.
At first, the response looked deceptively simple. Streets were washed, sidewalks were scrubbed. Food from nearby restaurants and stores was thrown away as a precaution. But radioactive particles rarely stay where they first land. They were carried on clothing and shoes, spread by people walking through the city. Even the air played a role. People breathed in the contaminated dust and later breathed it out into their homes, offices, and shops. Within hours, survey teams began mapping the invisible contamination.
Let's move on.
Some areas showed only trace levels. Others revealed something far worse: hotspots. In those places, washing the streets wasn't enough, because radioactive particles didn't just sit on the surface. They sank into the pores of asphalt and concrete. They settled into cracks in sidewalks. They clung to building facades. Some salts, like cesium chloride, even bonded to the concrete itself. When that happened, demolition became the only option. Entire sections of pavement were ripped out. Contaminated soil was excavated. Truckloads of debris were sealed in containers and transported to radioactive waste sites.
Everything in here is contaminated. The whole apartment needs...
Most homes in the city survived the initial contamination, but some apartments were not so lucky. In those homes, contamination spread through carpets, furniture, and clothing. When that happened, the only option was to strip the apartment down to its walls. Everything inside, furniture, clothing, family belongings, was treated as radioactive waste. Memories, photographs, personal possessions, even expensive art, gone. Office buildings, HVAC systems, and in rare cases, entire buildings themselves. While cleaning up the radioactive contamination would take months or maybe even years, businesses closed overnight. Restaurants, offices, and shops sat empty behind police barricades. For many business owners, decades of work disappeared in a matter of days. And then the panic spread beyond the quarantine zone. Markets reacted.
It's chaos here in the New York Stock Exchange. Circuit breakers have tripped for the third time, halting trading for the day.
Saturday's terrorist attacks on crowds at college football stadiums in New York and Tel Aviv have gripped the market with fear.
Initially confined to quarantine zones, business failures quickly spread, and the resulting economic hardship extended across the entire country, far beyond areas affected by radioactive contamination. For most people caught in a radiological attack, the danger wasn't immediate. It was what came after, the dust that settled on them, and that got inside the body itself. Hours passed before the first symptoms began to appear: redness, swelling, burn-like irritation, where radioactive particles had remained in contact with the skin. Radiation injuries appeared mild at first, but weeks later, the damage became more clear. Hair began to fall out where exposure had been highest. Some wounds refused to heal. For some patients, the recovery process took months. But even months weren't enough for many patients. Even those who appeared healthy had to return for long-term monitoring, because radiation damage could take years to reveal itself. Doctors watched for changes in blood counts, organ function, and the early signs of cancer. For many families, the hardest part was not the injury, but the uncertainty. Would they ever return home? Would their neighborhood ever be safe again? Entire blocks remained closed for years as contamination slowly faded. A radiological attack destroys not just buildings, not just economies, but lives. People exposed to a radiological attack survived, but some did not. Those who had inhaled or ingested radioactive particles often suffered severe internal damage. For a small number of victims, the exposure proved fatal. Even in death, special precautions were required. Bodies had to be checked for contamination, radiation levels measured to protect those handling the remains. But can Iran actually make this happen? To build a radiological weapon, you need radioactive isotopes, and Iran already produces them. Its reactors manufacture medical isotopes used in hospitals across the region. But those same technologies can also produce dangerous materials. The Tehran Research Reactor, the TRR, is a small 5-megawatt research reactor in Tehran. It serves as Iran's primary engine for isotope production, and if optimized, the reactor could generate roughly 8,000 curies of cobalt-60 over a 3-year cycle. But 8,000 curies equals only about 6 or 7 grams of cobalt metal, roughly the weight of 8 to 10 paper clips. The reactor can also produce isotopes like iridium-192 and americium used in medicine and industrial imaging. Iran planned 2 additional reactors, one at Arak and another at Isfahan, but neither ever became operational. Both were damaged by airstrikes before they could begin producing material. Iran also operates a large nuclear power plant at Bushehr. Its fuel is supplied and managed by Russia, and the spent fuel must be returned. Any attempt to divert radioactive fuel would likely be noticed quickly by international monitoring. This means Iran's capacity to generate nuclear material on its own is relatively small. But there is another path to acquiring radioactive isotopes. While activity at a nuclear reactor would likely attract international attention, the removal of radioactive sources from civilian infrastructure likely would not, and would allow much greater quantities to be gathered. Across Iran, radioactive material already exists in many pieces of equipment used in hospitals, industrial radiography, and oil and gas drilling. Many of these devices contain small sealed sources of iridium, cobalt, cesium, or americium, embedded inside specialized instruments. Each source is typically a tiny sealed capsule designed for specific tasks, such as inspecting pipeline welds, measuring material density, or delivering radiation therapy. But across an entire national infrastructure, those sources add up. If gathered together, they could represent tens of thousands, possibly hundreds of thousands, of curies of radioactive material. And then there are the sterilization facilities. Medical equipment, from surgical tools to pharmaceuticals, is sterilized using gamma radiation from large arrays of cobalt-60. Because sterilization requires extremely intense radiation, a single facility may contain hundreds of thousands, sometimes millions, of curies, meaning several kilograms of material, some of the largest civilian concentrations of radioactive material anywhere in the country. Stopping a nuclear weapons program is one problem. Preventing the covert use of civilian radioactive sources is another entirely. Even in the best-case scenario, securing thousands of dispersed sources across a large country would be an enormous task. So Iran could acquire kilograms of material and hundreds of thousands, or even millions, of curies of radioisotopes. But what exactly is a curie? And how does it relate to the size of a dirty bomb? A curie measures how many radioactive decays occur each second. In other words, how much radiation a material is emitting. Each decay can release particles or energy such as alpha particles, beta particles, neutrons, or gamma rays. One way to think of it is like how many of these tiny bullets of radiation are being fired every second. One curie equals 37 billion radioactive decays per second. But the real-world impact is difficult to grasp at those scales. So to understand what those numbers mean, it helps to compare them with real accidents from the past. The 3 Mile Island accident in 1979 released radioactive gases into the atmosphere, mostly xenon, totaling millions of curies. But those gases rose high into the atmosphere and dispersed quickly, so measuring the event purely in curies can be misleading. Instead, it helps to look at the radioactive material that actually interacted with people and persisted in the environment. In this case, only tens to thousands of curies had any meaningful impact. Studies later found that most people living near the plant received roughly the radiation dose of a single chest X-ray. Even so, the accident triggered widespread fear and permanently changed how the public viewed nuclear power. A radiological weapon would be very different. Instead of short-lived gases drifting away, it could spread long-lasting radioactive material directly onto the ground, onto people, and into the places where they live and work. Isotopes like cobalt-60 or cesium-137 can remain hazardous for years or even decades. Cleaning them up can require the removal of contaminated soil, demolition of structures, or long-term evacuation. Hiroshima produced thousands to tens of thousands of curies of radioactive fallout that reached the ground, but even that was dispersed over a wide area by wind and rain. We've already discussed the Goiânia accident, where about 1,400 curies were released, much of it concentrated inside a single home. In comparison, a determined effort by Iran to collect civilian radioactive sources could potentially gather tens of thousands or even millions of curies of radioactive material. That means the amount of radioactive material Iran could use equates to hundreds of Hiroshimas or thousands of Goiânia disasters. But what about Chernobyl or Fukushima? Fukushima released roughly 500,000 curies of long-lived radioactivity, mostly cesium-137. Much of that drifted out over the Pacific Ocean, which greatly reduced the contamination on land. So in theory, a concentrated radiological attack by Iran could create far worse local contamination than Fukushima. Chernobyl released an immense amount of radioactive material, but much of it was radioactive iodine, which accounted for roughly 50 million curies. Most of that decayed quickly because iodine-131 has a half-life of only about 8 days. The real comparison for long-term contamination comes from the long-lived isotopes like cesium-137, of which Chernobyl released around 2 to 3 million curies. If Iran could acquire 1 million curies of cobalt-60, it could produce radioactive contamination around a third the magnitude of the long-term fallout from Chernobyl. And unlike an accident, it would happen deliberately. For decades, the world has asked one question about Iran. Do they have a nuclear weapon? But recent attacks didn't eliminate the threat. They changed it. A regime was pushed into a corner. Iran understood the cost of crossing the nuclear line, but once that cost no longer mattered, once survival itself was at stake, there were no guarantees left. And the world forgot the real threat.